You're listening to Permission To, the podcast where we dive into the science and soul of owning your worthiness as a perfectly imperfect human being. I'm your host, Sam Dew, psychotherapist, positive psychology coach, mama to a beautiful 5-year-old Amelie, and passionate advocate for living an inspired life. My aim is to show you that you have full permission to own your worthiness so that you can embrace your true nature and begin walking boldly toward your dreams. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of Permission To with Sam Dew. Today we are going to be talking all things permission to say no minus the guilt. And it's a big topic that comes up a lot with my coaching clients and in my group calls. And I think this is really an episode for you if you've ever kind of noticed yourself doing something that you instantly regretted, or trying to please people because you're worried that saying no makes you mean or rude, or because you feel guilty for saying no, then this episode is for you. So let's dive straight in. I just wanted to say that I think the most important part of learning to say no is actually getting off autopilot. And what I mean by that is if you're automatically someone who says yes, or if you identify as a people pleaser, then often you might actually be saying yes without even giving yourself a moment to pause and check in with yourself, check in with your energy levels, check in with your capacity to actually see whether it's a yes or a no from you. And so I'm going to go through 3 really simple steps that I use to kind of support myself and my clients to get off autopilot so that it's not an automatic yes. It's you're only saying yes to the things that are really aligned with your life, that you have, that they're intentional yeses, not just automatic yeses. So firstly, this was actually a question that came up in my free Facebook group around how do you set boundaries if you don't even know what you want? And it's actually really true. Like, a lot of us don't even really know what we want, or we're not very clear on it. So the first step is getting clear on what you want. So not saying yes to everything and actually getting clear on what your priorities are. So make sure you're checking in with yourself regularly about what you really want and what your priorities are. I use a weekly practice. I like to really kind of plan my week, write down a couple of things that are priorities for me in that week, and actually block out time for those priorities. So that's one way that you can get really clear on what you want. The other is just taking a couple of deep breaths, putting your hand on your heart and asking yourself, what are my priorities at the moment? And just listen to yourself, and if there's any gentle nudges of inner wisdom that are coming out there. And a daily journaling practice can really support you with this as well. The second step is to stop making yes your default answer. So when someone asks you for something, what you're going to do is actually use the following phrase, or something a little bit similar, which essentially it's about giving yourself permission to take time with your response. So super simple but super powerful. When someone asks you for something, you can say, let me check my schedule, or let me think about it, or let me get back to you on that. I just need to double check a couple of things. This is really a very powerful step in getting off autopilot, because you're actually learning to pause and get off autopilot and actually take some space before you decide if it's a yes or a no. And I'm going to share a really powerful example of that soon. Step 3, once you've gifted yourself some space and time to make a decision, take a couple of big breaths to get grounded, and then check in with that person's request. What is your energy like? What is your capacity like? How do you want to respond? Ask yourself, what do I want? What do I need? And then this is going to give you your answer of if it's a yes or a no, or a not right now, maybe later, whatever your answer is going to be. So I'm just going to share a little example, and then I'll talk to you about how to communicate no. So actually, I was working with this beautiful client last year. She was a coaching client who is a mama and a business owner, and she just was someone who was super overcommitted and really overwhelmed, and she came to me wanting support for stress and overwhelm. She was someone who was like just naturally talented and good at everything, and a really generous, big-hearted woman. And so she just ended up being involved in so many different activities and lots of multiple projects and businesses on the go, and all really amazing stuff. But what she noticed was that she just couldn't stop saying yes, and she was just feeling so overwhelmed. And so we implemented a really, really simple strategy, which was just simply when someone asked her if she could help with a task or if she could be involved in something, that she would actually say, look, I need to check my diary, I'll get back to you. And then we implemented like a weekly planner, like what I use. And she actually kept that in paper at home by her bedside table. And so that way it kind of meant that she broke that pattern of just saying yes automatically, because she started a new habit of actually going home and looking at her week and then deciding whether it was a yes or no. And this was so empowering for her, because when she would go home and look at her diary, she'd be like, oh my gosh, like I already have so much on. If I say yes to this, that's going to mean that I'm sacrificing, my rest time or time with my family or something else that's really important to me. And so that was a really, really powerful tool for her. So now I want to talk about, once you've decided if it's a yes or a no, I think this is the final step, and maybe the one that a lot of women find the most challenging, and that's actually how to say no. And so I want you to know, if it's a no and you don't usually say no, it's likely that you're going to feel uncomfortable because you're doing something new. Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong, or that you're bad for saying no. It's just like anything else. When we're trying a new skill, it often feels uncomfortable and stretchy, and you just need to keep practicing it. So just remember that saying no is a muscle that you can build, and there's lots of different ways that you can say no. It's okay. I think a lot of women over-explain their no's because they feel uncomfortable with it, so they'll go into long explanations. It is okay to just be like, thank you for the invitation, but no, I can't make it, or I'm really interested in that, but I just don't feel like I've got capacity at the moment, or just no thanks. Or like if it's something you're genuinely interested in being involved in later, you could say, not right now, but I would love to reschedule. So there's so many different ways that you can say no. But what I really invite you to do today is actually to do some journaling around the stories you tell yourself around saying no, because I think often before we can actually practice saying no, we need to just get really clear on what we believe about saying no, because a lot of women have got a lot of guilt around saying no, and they think like if you say no, that means you're a selfish person, or you're not generous, or saying no is really mean. There's so many stories that aren't true that will come up for us when we think about saying no. I really encourage you to do some journaling, like just get a bit of paper out and do a massive brain dump about all the stories and beliefs and rules that you have around saying no. And then can you reframe those and choose something more empowering? So like, what's a more empowering way or more helpful way to think about saying no? What would you like the next generation of women to learn about saying no? What would you like to teach them? And actually, one of my beautiful clients who was in Permission Granted last year had a saying that saying no is one of the wisest, kindest things that you can do in your relationships. And I mentioned this in the Boundaries podcast as well, because I genuinely think that she's right. Like when we keep saying yes to things when we really want to say no, what happens is resentment builds up. People can pick it up in our energy. Things get really messy and confusing. So saying no can be a really generous, kind, beautiful, wise thing to do in your relationships. And that's such a powerful reframe to help you step away from that guilt around saying no. So yeah, I encourage you to do your own journaling work and really get to the bottom of why you think saying no is bad if you struggle with it. And then practice. If you're really not used to saying no, you might want to do some visualizing of yourself saying no so that it actually becomes a word that you're more comfortable with. And yeah, you can go from there. So just to summarize that before we wrap up, firstly, you want to be clear on what you want. So really clear on what's going on in your life and what you want. Then secondly, when someone makes a request of you, you want to give yourself some time and space and get off autopilot. So that is just by, not saying yes straight away, asking for some time, asking to check your diary. And then thirdly, once you do go home and check your diary or your calendar or whatever, also making sure that you're checking in with yourself about how you're feeling, what your capacity is like, and what your energy is like. And then making a decision about whether it's a yes or a no, and practicing communicating that, and remembering that, communicating no can actually be a beautiful gift because you're being honest, and it's good for relationships. So that's it in a nutshell. I would love to hear how you go with this episode. And as always, I'm trying to get the word out about permission to as many women as possible. So if you liked this podcast or found it helpful, I would be so grateful if you could leave a 5-star review and leave a few comments. And I will see you in the next episode. Have a beautiful week.